The scent of damp earth and cooking smoke permeated the chilly morning air of Stonebrook Village, a smell so familiar that Elara no longer noticed it. 18 years old this year, she had spent her entire life within the embrace of the small village nestled on the slopes of Heron Peak, where ancient bamboo trees cast their shadows upon a clear stream. Life in Stonebrook was never easy. Each day was a struggle with barren land, failed harvests, and the heavy burden of taxes from Lord Vargas, who ruled this land with an iron fist. This morning, the church bell's chime was not a call to dawn, but a long, mournful peal, signalling bad news. Elara was helping her mother grind corn in their cramped kitchen, her calloused hands deftly pushing the millstone. Her mother, Lyra, stopped, her eyes etched with crow's feet staring out the window, where the morning light was still dim. It must be a new tax decree, Lyra sighed, her voice hoarse from years of hard labour. The Lord won't leave us in peace. Elara said nothing, but her heart tightened. How could they pay more tribute? Last night, she had overheard her father and uncle discussing having to sell their family's only milk cow. Her father, Tom's hurried footsteps sounded outside the door. He burst into the kitchen, his face smeared with mud and full of worry. "Lyra, Elara, the Lord has issued a new order." Elara and her mother looked at him expectantly, a feeling of dread rising within them. "He demands that each family send one young, strong person to serve in his army or work as a labourer in his northern mines. Otherwise the fine will double, and the land will be confiscated," Tom almost shouted, his eyes bloodshot. And he said, "Any strong enough girl will be chosen first." A cold shiver ran down Elara's spine. She was the strongest among the villagers, young, tall and robust from years of helping her father in the fields. She knew, deep down, her parents wouldn't be able to object. If the family lost their land, they would have nothing left. That evening, by the flickering fire in their small house, Elara made her decision. "Father, Mother, I will go." Tom and Lyra looked at her, their eyes filled with sorrow but not surprise. They knew it was the only way to save their family. "But you've never left the village," Lyra sobbed. "The outside world. It's harsh." "I know," Elara replied, her voice more resolute than she felt, "but I won't let my family starve. I will go, and I will find a way to survive." The next morning Elara left Stonebrook Village before the sun had fully risen. The ancient bamboo rustled like a farewell. With a crude cloth bag containing a few pieces of dry bread, a small knife, and a promise to return, Elara stepped into a vast and unfamiliar world where rugged paths and uncertain fates awaited her. She did not know that this journey would not only lead her to dark mines or military camps, but also entangle her in an ancient conspiracy, changing the destiny of the entire land. Peaceful Stonebrook Village lay nestled in a small valley, surrounded by rolling hills and the winding Heron stream. From the summit of Heron Peak, the village resembled a miniature painting with its cluster of thatched roofs, verdant, or golden at harvest time, terraced fields, and winding dirt paths. The people of Stonebrook primarily lived by farming, cultivating wheat and corn, and raising small livestock. Their lives were intertwined with the land and nature, simple yet arduous. They believed in forest gods, river spirits, and frequently held festivals to pray for rain and bountiful harvests. Elara's family lived in one of the smallest houses in the village, with mud walls and a thatched roof, tucked away behind dense bamboo groves. Her father, Tom, was an honest, diligent man whose health had deteriorated after years of relentless labour. Her mother, Lyra, was a gentle, hard-working woman, her hands always busy with household chores and farm work. Elara was the eldest daughter, and she had two younger brothers, Rorick, 12, agile and curious, and Finn, 8, quiet and dreamy. All three siblings helped their parents with work, but Elara was the most capable. She possessed an astonishing physical strength for a girl, perhaps inherited from distant ancestors or developed from years of carrying firewood, drawing water, and tilling the soil since childhood. The relationship between Elara and her parents was very close. She always tried to shoulder the heavy tasks to lighten her parents' burden. With Rorick and Finn, Elara was both a sister, a friend, and a guide. She often told her siblings fairy tales about heroes, brave warriors, or resilient princesses, but she never imagined that one day her own life would become such a story. The nearest town, Oakhaven, was a day's walk from Stonebrook. It was the only place where the people of Stonebrook could sell their produce and buy essential goods they couldn't make themselves. But travel was dangerous, especially when carrying valuable goods. The deserted forest roads were often hiding places for bandits or wild creatures. Therefore, the people of Stonebrook rarely ventured far, except for important market trips or when absolutely necessary. The land where Stonebrook was located fell under the rule of Lord Vargas, a cruel, wicked man who lived in a dark castle atop Craig's Edge. Vargas was the embodiment of oppression. He cared nothing for the lives of the common folk, only exploiting them with exorbitant taxes and harsh laws. In recent years, the burden had grown heavier as the Lord continuously increased taxes and conscripted soldiers, forcing people to labour in mines about which no one was allowed to know the details. The people of Stonebrook lived in constant fear and anxiety, but no one dared to voice an objection. They simply bowed their heads and endured, praying for better harvests and a less arduous life. On the afternoon the decree was issued, the atmosphere in Stonebrook village was heavy. The muffled sobs of mothers and the weary sighs of fathers echoed from every home. Lord Vargas's soldiers, in their dark armour and emotionless faces, had gone house to house, clearly announcing his demands. Each family had to contribute one labourer, male or female, as long as they were strong. Otherwise, that family's taxes would double, and by the next harvest their land would be confiscated. In Elara's home, the flickering firelight from the hearth illuminated the haggard faces of Tom and Lyra. That evening's meal consisted only of a few boiled yams. No one had the appetite to eat. Rorik and Finn sat silently, their childlike eyes filled with fear as they looked at their parents and older sister. Tom slammed his hand on the table, the dry thud echoing in the quiet space. "We cannot lose the land. The land is all we have." Lyra brought a hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. "But who will go? Rorik is too young, Finn is weak, and you, Tom, you no longer have the strength." All eyes turned to Elara. She knew it. She was the only one who met the criteria. Tall, strong, and unmarried. A young woman like her would be a prime target. Elara felt a cold dread creep into her heart. She had never left the village. The outside world, as her mother said, was a frightening place, fraught with danger. She had heard stories of those who were taken, never to return, enslaved in dark mines or killed in dark mines or killed in the Lord's meaningless battles. Deep in her heart she yearned for a normal life, a simple life with her family, on the familiar fields. She dreamed of marrying a kind village man, having children, and continuing her ancestors' way of life. But now that dream seemed more distant than ever. However, as she looked into the desperate eyes of her parents, at the innocent faces of her younger brothers, a resilient fire suddenly ignited within Elara. She could not let her family suffer further. She could not let them lose their home, lose the land that sustained them. "I will go," Elara said, her voice clear and decisive, cutting through the heavy silence. Tom and Lyra looked up at her, their eyes wide with surprise, then shifting to pain. "No, Elara," Lyra cried out, embracing her daughter. "You cannot! You are my daughter! You will be in danger!" "Mother, if I don't go, we will lose everything," Elara gently pulled her mother's hands away. "I am strong. I will survive. I will find a way to return. I promise." Tom placed a hand on Elara's shoulder, his eyes brimming with tears. "My daughter, you are truly brave." It was a sleepless night. Elara spent time with her family trying to memorize every face, every gesture, every scent of their home. She comforted her siblings, promising to bring back exciting gifts from the outside world. She listened to her parents' admonitions to be careful, to trust herself, and to always remember home. In Elara's heart fear still lingered, but now it was mingled with an iron resolve. She was not a warrior. She was just a farm girl. But she would fight in her own way, for her family, for her village, and for a future she believed she could forge. At dawn, on the third day after the decree was issued, a small group of selected young people, including Elara, gathered in the village square. There were about 15 individuals, mostly young men, but also a few strong girls like Elara. All bore heavy expressions, their eyes swollen from sleeplessness. Elara's family stood at the edge of the crowd, Tom trying to appear strong, but his lips trembled. Lyra held Elara tightly, tears streaming ceaselessly. "Be careful, my daughter," she whispered into Elara's ear. "Come back to your mother. Elara nodded, trying to suppress her emotions. "I will, Mother, I promise." Rorik and Finn stood beside their parents, their wide eyes gazing at their older sister. Rorik clung to Elara's sleeve, unwilling to let go. "Sister Elara, don't go." Elara knelt, embracing her two siblings. "I have to go, Rorik. I'll bring back new stories for you, and I'll teach you how to hunt when I return." She kissed Finn's forehead. The boy remained silent, but his eyes were watery. Elara stood up, taking one last look at the faces of her loved ones, etching their images into her heart. Lord Vargas's soldiers, led by a fierce captain named Grimgar, were ready. Grimgar was a large man with a long scar on his cheek, his cold eyes sweeping over each person in the group. He whistled a signal, and the soldiers pushed the young people forward. Elara walked, each step heavy. She turned to look at Stonebrook village one last time. The thatched roofs, the fields, the heron stream sparkling under the early sun, all grew smaller, then disappeared behind the trees. The path ahead was rugged, strewn with rocks and dirt. On both sides were dense forests, occasionally echoing with the cries of wild birds. Elara walked with the others, mostly unfamiliar faces, though they all came from nearby villages. Everyone was silent, lost in their own thoughts, in fear and uncertainty. A young girl named Wren from the nearby village of Larkwood walked beside Elara. Wren was smaller than Elara, her chestnut hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck, her brown eyes still moist. She gently touched Elara's arm. "Sister, are you scared?" Elara looked at Wren, trying to offer a reassuring smile. "Yes, but we have to be strong, don't we?" Wren nodded, clutching the crude cloth bag in her hand. "I heard the mines in the north are terrible. Many never return." "Then we have to be the ones who do return," Elara said, her voice filled with determination. She didn't know if she was trying to reassure Wren or herself. They continued to walk, the crunch of their footsteps on the gravel. Vargas's soldiers said nothing, only urged them to go faster. The sun rose higher and the air began to warm. Elara felt tired, but she knew this was just the beginning. The uncertain path lay before her, leading to an unwritten destiny. She didn't know what awaited her ahead: hardship, danger, or even death. But one thing she was sure of: she would not give up. She would find a way to survive, and she would return home. The journey northward was relentless. Day after day the group trudged along dusty, ill-maintained roads, their spirits slowly worn down by the monotonous rhythm of marching and the ever-present threat of the soldiers' whips. Captain Grimgar enforced strict discipline, allowing few breaks and punishing any sign of weakness or defiance. Meals were meagre, stale bread and thin gruel, barely enough to sustain their energy. Nights were spent in makeshift camps, sometimes in deserted barns, sometimes simply huddled together in the open, under the indifferent gaze of the stars. Elara found herself drawing upon reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. Her sturdy build, honed by years of farm work, helped her endure the physical strain, but the emotional toll was heavy. The constant fear, the gnawing hunger, and the crushing weight of uncertainty were relentless. She often thought of her family, of Tom's weary face and Lyra's tear-streaked cheeks, and it fueled her resolve. She had to return. Wren, her newfound companion, proved to be a quiet but resilient soul. Though physically smaller, her spirit was tenacious. They shared what little food they had, and offered each other silent comfort during the long, cold nights. They weren't friends in the way Elara had known friendship in Stonebrook, but a bond of shared suffering and unspoken solidarity quickly formed between them. The landscape changed as they moved further north. The rolling hills of Stonebrook gave way to increasingly rugged terrain, dense ancient forests with trees that towered like silent sentinels, and eventually desolate plains under a perpetually grey sky. The air grew colder, and the wind carried a biting chill, a stark contrast to the familiar warmth of her village. One evening, as they were making camp in a small damp clearing, a commotion erupted. A young man named Jorik from a village further down the valley from Stonebrook had collapsed from exhaustion and refused to move. Captain Grimgar, his face contorted in a sneer, approached Jorik with his whip raised. "Get up, worm, or you'll feel the sting of my justice," Grimgar snarled. Jorik, pale and trembling, merely shook his head. I can't go on." Without hesitation, Grimgar brought the whip down. A sharp crack echoed through the clearing, and Yorick cried out, a red welt appearing on his back. The other conscripts flinched, some turning their faces away. Elara felt a surge of cold fury, but she knew she couldn't intervene. Such an act would only bring Grimgar's wrath upon her and potentially worsen Yorick's fate. But then a figure emerged from the shadows at the edge of the camp. He was a tall, lean man, cloaked in dark, worn leather, with a grizzled beard and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of many years. He moved with a silent grace that belied his age, and the soldiers, usually quick to challenge strangers, seemed hesitant as he approached. Is this how Lord Vargas treats his future labourers? The man's voice was low, gravelly, yet carried an undeniable authority that made Grimgar pause. Or do you prefer to beat the life out of them before they even reach the mines? Grimgar bristled. This is none of your concern, old man. These are the Lord's conscripts. And the Lord requires strong hands, not broken bodies, the man countered, his gaze unwavering. A dead or crippled labourer is useless. Let the boy rest. He'll be more productive tomorrow. Grimgar hesitated, clearly annoyed but also sensing something in the stranger that made him wary. He spat on the ground. Fine, but if he falls behind again, he's food for the wolves, and you, old man, stay out of the Lord's business. The stranger merely inclined his head slightly. He then walked over to Yorick, offering a small leather flask. Drink this. It will help. Yorick, too stunned to refuse, took a sip of the bitter liquid. Elara watched the interaction, a flicker of hope igniting within her. This stranger was unlike anyone she had ever encountered. He radiated an aura of quiet strength and independence, daring to challenge Vargas's captain where others dared not. His presence offered a brief respite, a moment where the crushing power of the Lord's soldiers seemed to falter. Later that night, as the camp settled into a restless silence, Elara saw the stranger sitting by a small discreet fire, sharpening a wickedly curved sword. She couldn't shake the feeling that this man, with his mysterious demeanour and unexpected intervention, might be more than just a passing wanderer. He might be the first crack in the seemingly impenetrable wall of her bleak journey. Elara lay awake, the cold ground seeping through her thin blanket. Ren was asleep beside her, her breathing shallow and even. The image of the cloaked stranger sharpening his sword kept her mind restless. Curiosity, a rare luxury in her hardship-filled life, nagged at her. She carefully rose, trying not to disturb Ren, and slowly made her way towards the faint glow of his fire. As she approached, the man looked up. His eyes, dark and piercing even in the dim light, met hers without surprise. He had a weathered face, etched with lines that spoke of a life lived hard and long, a network of scars barely visible beneath his grizzled beard. "Can't sleep, girl?" he asked, his voice still low but not unkind. "No, sir," Elara replied, standing a respectful distance away. I just wanted to thank you for what you did for Yorick." He grunted, turning his attention back to his blade. A waste of good labour to beat a man simply for exhaustion. You dared to speak to Captain Grimgar like that," Elara ventured, a hint of awe in her voice. "No one else would." The man paused his sharpening, looking at her directly. "Some things are worth speaking against, child, even if it changes little." He held up the sword, inspecting its gleaming edge. "My name is Kael." "Elara from Stonebrook," she introduced herself, feeling a strange mix of apprehension and a nascent trust. "You're not one of Lord Vargas's men?" "Hardly," Kael scoffed, a dry, humourless chuckle escaping him. "I've no master and no desire for one, especially not Vargas." He gestured to the ground opposite him. "Sit if you wish. The night is long." Elara hesitated for a moment, then sat down, pulling her knees to her chest. The warmth from his small fire was a welcome relief from the biting cold. "You travel alone, Kael?" "Mostly. It's safer that way." He ran a thumb over the blade's edge. "Where are you all headed?" "The northern mines," Elara said, her voice dropping. "Lord Vargas's mines. We're conscripts. Or slaves, more like." Kael's expression darkened slightly. "The mines of Gloomfang. A fitting name. They say what Vargas seeks in those depths is not merely ore, but something darker." Elara's eyes widened. "Darker? What do you mean?" Kael looked into the flames, a distant look in his eyes. "Old rumours. Whispers of strange powers, of people driven mad, of things that stir beneath the earth. Vargas has been obsessed with those mines for years, pouring all his resources into them. He started with the regular iron and silver veins, but lately he's been pushing deeper, into places even the old miners feared. They say the air down there, it changes people, fills them with a strange sickness or a madness that makes them lash out. He paused, then added, his voice barely a whisper. Some say he's found a source of raw shadow, or that he's trying to awaken something ancient and terrible that sleeps deep within the mountains. Something that could consume us all. Elara shivered, despite the fire's warmth. The harsh reality of her journey suddenly felt much more sinister. She had prepared herself for hard labour, for hunger, even for cruelty, but not for ancient evils or creeping madness. Why would he do that? What good would come of such a thing? Power, child, Kale replied, his gaze fixed on her. Always power. Vargas craves it. He wants to extend his dominion, to crush any who oppose him, and if these rumours are true, he believes the mines hold the key. And you, Kale? Elara asked, emboldened by his candour. Why are you here? Are you going to the mines? Kale's lips thinned into a grim line. My path is my own, but it sometimes crosses with others, and sometimes those paths align with certain injustices. Vargas has done enough harm in these lands, and the rumours of Gloomfang have grown too loud to ignore. He met her gaze, a flicker of something akin to grim determination in his eyes. Tell me, Elara from Stonebrook, what would you do if you found yourself facing this darker thing in the mines? Would you simply endure it, or would you fight? Elara considered his question. Her initial instinct was to survive, to return home. But hearing Kale speak of a greater evil, of madness and ancient powers, stirred something within her. She thought of her family, of her village, and the innocent people being dragged towards a terrible fate. I would fight, she said, her voice small but firm. I don't know how, but I would try. A ghost of a smile touched Kale's lips. Good. That's a start. He looked back at the slumbering camp, at the figures of the soldiers guarding their prisoners. The journey to Gloomfang is long, and the true dangers may not be the ones you expect. The forced march continued for another week, a relentless grind that stretched the conscripts to their limits. They passed through small, forlorn villages, their inhabitants hiding in their homes, their faces etched with fear when the Lord's soldiers passed by. The sight fueled Elara's sense of injustice, deepening her resolve. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they approached Oakhaven, the nearest market town to Stonebrook. It was a larger settlement than Elara had ever seen, though still modest. A sturdy wooden palisade surrounded it, and a single, well-trodden gate allowed access. Even from a distance, Elara could see the bustling activity, carts rattling, merchants hawking their wares, and the general clamour of a populated place. It was a stark contrast to the quiet, isolated life of Stonebrook. We'll rest here for a night or two, Grimgar announced, his voice gruff. The Lord's quartermaster needs to replenish supplies before we press on to Gloomfang. Any trouble, any attempt to escape, and you'll be made an example of. His eyes lingered on Elara and Kyle, a warning in their depths. The conscripts were herded into a makeshift holding pen within the town's perimeter, a muddy enclosure near the stables. It offered little comfort, but the mere sight of buildings and the sounds of ordinary life were a strange relief after days on the open road. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Elara and Wren sat huddled together. The guards were less vigilant here, distracted by the town's diversions. Kale, true to his nature, had managed to slip away from the group and was nowhere to be seen, likely scouting or gathering information. As night fell, whispers began to circulate among the conscripts. "Have you heard about the mining accidents?" one young man muttered, his voice low. "They say whole sections of the tunnels collapse, not from bad supports, but from within." "And the sickness," another added. "My cousin was taken 2 months ago, came back a different man, eyes wide and glassy, muttering about shadows in the stone. Then he just wasted away." Elara listened intently, Kale's words about the mines of Gloomfang echoing in her mind. The rumours here were far more chilling than anything she'd heard in Stonebrook. These weren't just stories of harsh labour. They spoke of something truly unnatural. A grizzled old man named Borin, a veteran miner from a distant region who had been conscripted for his experience, overheard their conversation. He leaned closer, his face grim. It's not just sickness or collapses. There's talk of a hum from deep within the earth, a sound that gets into your head, twisting your thoughts, and the guardians, they're not natural beasts. Guardians, Elara questioned, her voice barely a whisper. Borin nodded slowly. Creatures, not beasts of the forest, but things born of the stone and the shadow that feeds it. They say Vargas is using them to guard whatever he's found down there, and they don't care who they kill, conscript or soldier. The story sent a fresh wave of dread through Elara. It wasn't just Vargas she had to fear, but something far more ancient and terrifying. The thought of her family, oblivious to these horrors, gave her a renewed sense of urgency. She had to find a way to escape, not just for herself, but to warn her village. Just then, a shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness beyond the pen. Kael. He moved with silent efficiency, appearing beside Elara and Ren as if he had materialized from the very air. The rumors are true and worse, he murmured, his voice urgent. Vargas isn't just mining for wealth. He's awakening something, and the town guards here, they're jumpy. They fear something is coming from the north, something they can't fight. What are we going to do, Kael? Elara asked, her eyes wide. We can't just march into Gloomfang. Kael's gaze swept over the conscripts, then back to the darkness. Number. We can't, but we can't stay here either. Grimgar leaves at dawn, but the mines are not our only destination. There's another path, a forgotten one. But it requires speed, stealth, and a willingness to abandon this path Vargas has laid out. He paused, his gaze fixed on Elara. Are you ready to truly leave the path, Elara of Stonebrook? The question hung in the night air, heavy with consequence. Are you ready to truly leave the path? Elara looked at Ren, whose face was pale with fear, but whose eyes held a flicker of defiance. She thought of her family, of the darkness Kael spoke of, and the hopeless future awaiting them in Gloomfang. There was no choice. Yes, Kael, Elara said, her voice firm, we are ready. Kael nodded, a ghost of approval in his grim expression. Good. Here's what we'll do. Tonight the guards are lax, many are drinking in the taverns, the northern gate is less patrolled. I found a way to disable the lock. He handed Elara a small, intricately carved wooden whistle. If we get separated, blow this 3 times. I'll find you. Stick close and trust my lead. No sound, no hesitation. He then looked at Ren. Can you move quietly, girl? Ren swallowed hard. I think so. I used to sneak out to meet friends at night. Good, Kael said. Your nimbleness might serve us well. Stay directly behind Elara. The plan was simple and dangerously audacious. As the moon climbed higher and the sounds of the town slowly faded into a drunken murmur, Kael began to move. He was a shadow among shadows, his movements fluid and silent. Elara, with Ren clinging to her makeshift cloak, followed, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. They crept along the edges of the holding pen, past sleeping conscripts and through thickets of overgrown bushes. The air was cold, damp, and smelled of horses and stale ale. Elara's senses were heightened, every snap of a twig, every distant bark of a dog sending a jolt of adrenaline through her. She remembered her father teaching her to move quietly in the forest, to become one with the rustling leaves, and she drew upon that primal knowledge now. They reached the northern gate. 2 guards stood by a flickering torch, their conversation muffled by the wind. They were laughing, seemingly distracted. Kael melted into the darkness near the gatehouse, and Elara watched, holding her breath as he worked quickly and silently. A faint click, almost inaudible, reached her ears. Suddenly a guard yawned loudly, stretching. Almost time for a change, he grumbled. This northern watch is always boring. Kael gave a barely perceptible signal, and Elara knew it was now or never. He pushed open a small, creaking wicket gate, just large enough for one person to slip through at a time. Go! Kael whispered, urgency in his voice. Elara pushed Ren ahead of her, then squeezed through the narrow opening. The cold night air outside the palisade hit her face, a rush of freedom mixed with terrifying uncertainty. She turned, expecting Kael to follow, but just as he was about to slip through, a sudden clang echoed from inside the gatehouse. The 2 guards spun around, their eyes narrowing. Hey, who's there? One of them shouted, drawing his sword. Go! Run! Don't look back! Kael yelled, his voice rough. He drew his curved sword, its steel glinting in the torchlight, and immediately engaged the guards. The clash of steel on the steel rang out sharp and sudden. Elara froze, torn. She wanted to help Cale, but his words echoed in her mind. "Don't look back." Ren was already pulling at her arm, her eyes wide with terror. "We have to go, Elara. He said run," Ren cried. With a final agonizing glance back at the flashing steel, and Cale's cloaked figure fighting against two armed guards, Elara turned and ran. She grabbed Ren's hand, pulling her along, their feet pounding on the soft earth outside the town walls. They plunged into the darkness of the surrounding forest, the sounds of the fight and the alarm bells that now began to clang in Oakhaven slowly fading behind them. They were free, but at what cost? Cale had sacrificed himself for their escape, leaving them alone in a world far more dangerous than she could have imagined. Her first true companion, perhaps her only hope, was gone. Elara and Ren ran blindly through the forest, the adrenaline pumping through their veins, dulling the sharp edges of the branches that lashed at them, and the rocks that bruised their feet. The distant clang of alarm bells from Oakhaven grew fainter, eventually swallowed by the rustling leaves and the calls of night creatures. They didn't stop until their lungs burned and their legs ached, collapsing in a tangled thicket of thorny bushes, gasping for breath. He saved us," Ren whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Cale, he stayed behind." Elara could only nod, her own throat tight with unshed tears. The image of Cale, sword drawn, facing the guards alone, was burned into her mind. Guilt gnawed at her, a bitter taste in her mouth. She had left him, but he had told her to run. "We have to keep moving," Elara finally managed, pushing herself up. "We can't stay here. Grimgar will send his men after us." They moved slower now, more cautiously, deeper into the forest. The moon offered little light filtering through the dense canopy. Elara relied on her instincts, remembering how her father navigated the woods around Stonebrook. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every sound a lurking danger. The forest, once a familiar and comforting presence around her village, now felt vast, indifferent, and full of unknown perils. After what felt like hours, as the first grey streaks of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, they stumbled upon a small hidden cave, almost completely concealed by moss-covered rocks and drooping ferns. It was small, but offered shelter from the elements and a place to rest. Inside, they collapsed, utterly exhausted. Elara reached into her crude bag, pulling out the last few pieces of dry bread. They shared it in silence, the meagre sustenance a stark reminder of their precarious situation. "What now?" Ren asked, her voice small. "Where do we go?" Elara looked at the small wooden whistle Cale had given her. "If we get separated, blow this 3 times. I'll find you." Was he still alive? Could he still find them? It was a slim hope, but it was all they had. "We need to find food, water," Elara said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "And we need to get far away from Oakhaven." Cale. He mentioned another path, a forgotten one. They spent the day hidden in the cave, resting and recovering their strength. Elara ventured out cautiously to find water from a nearby spring and forage for berries, relying on her knowledge of edible plants from Stonebrook. The forest was different here, wilder, but the basic principles of survival remained. As dusk approached, a chilling thought struck Elara. What if Cale hadn't made it? What if he was captured, or worse, if he was gone, they were truly alone? The whistle felt heavy in her hand. "Blow this 3 times. I'll find you." She took a deep breath, the cold forest air filling her lungs. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but she had to try. She brought the whistle to her lips and blew. Whistle! The sound was thin and reedy in the vastness of the forest. She waited. Nothing. She blew again. Whistle! A little stronger this time. Still silence, save for the chirping of crickets. With a surge of desperation, she blew for the 3rd time, putting all her strength into it. Whistle! This time the sound carried further, a piercing cry into the encroaching night. A few moments passed, filled with agonizing silence. Elara's heart sank. She was about to give up, to accept that Cale was truly gone, when a faint, barely perceptible sound reached her ears. A rustle in the undergrowth, closer than she expected. Then a low, familiar voice. "Took you long enough, child. I was beginning to think you'd forgotten my little gift." Kyle emerged from the shadows, his cloak blending seamlessly with the gloom. He looked tired, a fresh cut visible on his cheek, but his eyes held their usual piercing intensity. Relief, so profound it almost made Elara weak, washed over her. "Kale," Wren cried out, scrambling to her feet. You're alive!" Elara stammered, a genuine smile breaking through her fear for the first time in days. Kale gave a wry chuckle. "It takes more than a few Lord's guards to send an old wolf to his den. They'll be searching the main roads now, assuming you fled south. This way, we head north, but not towards Gloomfang, not yet. We seek an old road, forgotten by most. It will lead us to a place where we can truly plan, and where we might find answers about Vargas's obsession." He looked at them both, his expression serious. "But this path is more dangerous than any you've known. Are you still willing to walk it?" Elara looked at Wren, who despite her fear met Elara's gaze with new resolve. Elara then turned to Kale, her chin held high. "We are." With Kale leading the way, the journey took on a different tenor. He was a master of the wilderness, moving with an almost unnatural stealth and an uncanny ability to read the signs of the forest. He taught Elara and Wren how to identify edible plants and safe water sources, how to set simple snares, and how to move through the undergrowth without leaving a trace. He was a stern teacher, but his lessons were invaluable, and Elara, with her inherent strength and quick learning, absorbed them eagerly. Wren, while less physically robust, proved surprisingly adept at spotting details and remembering Kale's instructions. They avoided main roads entirely, opting instead for game trails, forgotten footpaths, and sometimes no path at all, pushing through dense woods and over rocky terrain. The landscape continued its shift, becoming wilder, more ancient. Towering gnarled trees with roots like grasping claws dominated the forests, and the air grew colder still, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. "This is the old road," Kyle explained one evening as they camped in a clearing beneath a massive ancient oak, its branches draped with moss, built by hands long dead, for purposes long forgotten. Before Vargas, before his father, even before the kingdoms fought their first wars, it leads to places of power and places of forgotten knowledge. "What kind of knowledge?" Elara asked, tending their small, smokeless fire. "Knowledge of the earth, of the stars, of the energies that bind this world," Kale said, his eyes scanning the surrounding darkness, "and of the shadow that seeks to unbind them." Over the next few days, Kale began to reveal more about his past, though often in fragmented, cryptic statements. He spoke of a time when honour still held sway, when he served a forgotten king, and how a betrayal had cost him everything, forcing him into a life of solitary wandering. He didn't elaborate on the specifics, but Elara sensed a deep, unhealed wound beneath his gruff exterior. She also learned that Kale was a former Grey Warden, a title she vaguely remembered from old legends her grandmother used to tell. Guardians who stood against ancient evils, though the story said they had vanished centuries ago. "The shadow is not merely a metaphor, child," Kale explained one afternoon as they carefully navigated a treacherous, crumbling path along a cliff edge. "It is a force, a corruption. It warps the land, twists the minds of men, and empowers creatures born of nightmare. Vargas, in his greed, is dabbling with powers he cannot comprehend. He is opening a door, and something terrible is waiting to step through." They began to encounter more direct signs of this corruption. Patches of forest where the trees were strangely withered, their leaves black and brittle. Small, unnaturally silent clearings where the ground felt cold and dead, and even the birds refused to sing. One evening, they heard strange, guttural howls in the distance, unlike any wild animal Elara had ever known. Kyle immediately extinguished their fire and kept them hidden until dawn, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "Those were not wolves," he murmured the next morning, his face grim. "Those were creatures touched by the shadow. The guardians Borin spoke of. They are moving further from Gloomfang, following the tendrils of corruption Vargas is spreading. Their journey was no longer just an escape, it was becoming a quest for understanding." Elara realized that the fate of Stonebrook, and perhaps many other villages, hinged not just on her survival, but on uncovering the truth behind Lord Vargas's dark ambitions. They pressed on, driven by a growing sense of urgency. The old road eventually led them to a series of ancient, overgrown ruins, Crumbling stone walls shrouded in ivy, broken arches that once stood tall, now swallowed by the forest. It was a place of forgotten grandeur, hinting at a civilization that had existed long before Vargas's ancestors ruled these lands. "This was once a sanctuary," Cale said, his voice tinged with melancholy as they stood amidst the ruins. "A place of learning and protection, a bastion against the encroaching darkness. Now, it is merely a reminder of what can be lost." As they explored the ruins, Elara found a broken stone tablet, its surface covered in strange, flowing script she couldn't understand. She traced the symbols with her finger, feeling an odd resonance, a faint echo of something ancient and powerful. "What does it say?" she asked Cale. Kyle knelt, his brow furrowed as he deciphered the faded inscription. "It speaks of a heart of the mountain, a source of pure energy, and of a veil that once protected the lands from a great blight. It warns that when the veil weakens, the blight will stir, seeking to consume all light." He looked up, his eyes meeting Elara's. The heart of the mountain is likely what Vargas is seeking. He believes he can control its power, but if he breaks the veil, he will unleash more than he can ever hope to contain. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together, forming a terrifying picture. Elara knew then that her small village's plight was merely a symptom of a much larger, more ancient evil stirring beneath the surface of the world. Her journey had truly begun. Their time in the ancient ruins of the sanctuary, though brief, offered a much-needed respite and deepened their understanding of the looming threat. Cale spent hours poring over what ancient texts and faded carvings he could find, his knowledge of old lore proving invaluable. Elara, meanwhile, found herself drawn to the quiet strength of the crumbling stones, feeling a strange connection to the land and its forgotten history. Ren, though still easily startled, began to show a resilience that surprised them both, often finding hidden paths, or noticing subtle details that Cale or Elara missed. However, the sanctuary, for all its protection, could not hold them indefinitely. Food was scarce, and the threat of Grimgar's patrols or the shadow-touched creatures was ever present. Cale stressed the need to move, to find a place where they could truly prepare, and perhaps find others willing to stand against Vargas. "There's a hidden pass not far from here," Cale announced one morning, pointing to a jagged gap in the distant mountains. "It will take us around the main routes to Gloomfang, towards the Ironfang peaks. There are old dwarven strongholds there, long abandoned, but perhaps some knowledge remains. And more importantly, there might be those who still remember the old ways, who might recognize the signs of the encroaching blight." As they prepared to depart, a new unsettling discovery was made. While foraging near the edge of the ruins, Ren stumbled upon a small, fresh burial site, hastily covered. Digging it up, they found the bodies of two men, both clad in the uniform of Oakhaven town guards. Their faces were twisted in fear, and their bodies bore strange, dark lesions that seemed to seep into the flesh, unlike any wound from a weapon or animal. "Shadow-touched," Cale murmured, his face grim. "The blight is spreading, Elara, faster than I thought. These men were likely patrols venturing too close to the corruption, or perhaps they encountered one of Vargas's guardians that made it past the mines." The discovery solidified their resolve. Oakhaven, the town they had escaped, was now on the front lines of a burgeoning darkness. Elara felt a pang of guilt. She had fled for her family's sake, but now the people of Oakhaven, even the cruel guards, were innocent victims in Vargas's mad pursuit of power. "We have to warn them," Elara said, looking at Cale. "The people in Oakhaven, they don't know what's coming." Cale looked at her, his dark eyes assessing. "It's a suicide mission, child. Grimgar will still be looking for you, and if the blight has truly reached Oakhaven, the danger is immense." "But if we don't, they'll die," Elara insisted, her voice firm. "They deserve a chance to fight, or at least to flee." Ren surprisingly spoke up. "Elara's right. My uncle lives in Oakhaven. He's a blacksmith. He needs to know." Cale sighed, a long weary sound. "You're both fools, brave fools. Very well. We'll approach Oakhaven from the western woods, through the old logging trails. It's a risk, a great one. We'll need to be quick, stealthy, and trust no one we don't know." He looked at Elara, a new respect in his gaze. "Your heart is too kind for this world, Elara, but perhaps that is what it needs." Their plan was to infiltrate Oakhaven under the cover of darkness, find a trusted few, deliver their warning, and then retreat as quickly as possible towards the hidden mountain pass. It was a perilous detour, a direct defiance of Cale's usual cautious approach, but Elara's conviction had swayed him. As they began their stealthy approach back towards Oakhaven, the wind picked up, carrying with it not just the scent of pine, but a faint acrid smell that Elara couldn't quite place. It was unsettling, a hint of something unnatural that made the hair on her arms stand on end. The closer they got to the town, the stronger the feeling became, a palpable sense of unease that settled deep in her bones. Oakhaven was no longer just a bustling market town. It was a potential trap, a beacon for the encroaching shadow, and their mission to warn its inhabitants was a desperate gamble against a rising tide of darkness. The faint, acrid smell grew stronger as they drew closer to Oakhaven, mingling with the familiar sense of wood smoke and damp earth. Cale led them through a dense part of the western woods, following game trails so faint they were almost invisible. The moon was a sliver in the sky, casting long, distorted shadows that danced with every rustle of leaves. Elara and Wren moved with a newfound silence, their senses sharpened by the palpable tension in the air. Cale stopped them at the edge of the tree line overlooking the western palisade of Oakhaven. From here, the town seemed quiet, almost eerily so for a settlement of its size. The usual late-night chatter from taverns was subdued, replaced by an unsettling hush, broken only by the occasional distant bark of a dog or the mournful hoot of an owl. "The logging trails lead to a less-used gate on the western side," Cale whispered, his voice barely audible above the wind. "It's not as well guarded as the main north or south gates. We'll use the shadows of the lumber piles to get inside." They crept forward, their boots barely disturbing the fallen leaves. The palisade loomed, a crude but effective barrier. The gate Cale had spoken of was a heavy wooden structure, reinforced with iron, but it looked older, more weathered than the others. A single guard stood post, leaning against the wall, his head drooping. "Drunk, or simply weary," Cale murmured. "Either way, it works in our favour." With silent precision, Cale scaled the palisade near the gate, his calloused hands finding purchase in the rough wood. He moved with the grace of a phantom, dropping down on the other side with barely a sound. Elara, despite her strength, found climbing more challenging, but Cale's earlier lessons in leveraging her body weight proved invaluable. She hoisted herself up, muscles straining, and slid down the inner side, landing softly. Wren followed, nimble and light-footed, a natural at scaling. Once inside, they hugged the shadows, moving between stacks of newly cut timber and discarded wagons. The town was indeed different. Patrols of town guards were more frequent, their faces grim and wary. They spoke in hushed tones, glancing nervously into the darker alleys. The acrid smell was more pronounced here, a cloying sweetness that made Elara's stomach churn. "We need to find Wren's uncle," Cale whispered. "He's a blacksmith, yes. Blacksmiths usually have their forges on the outskirts, near the town walls to minimize fire risk. That works for us." Wren, though frightened, nodded. "His forge is near the old mill, southwest side." They navigated the winding, unlit streets, avoiding the main thoroughfares. Elara noticed strange symbols chalked onto some of the wooden doors and walls, crude, unsettling markings that she didn't recognize but which sent a prickle of unease down her spine. The few villagers they saw scurried into their homes, locking their doors at the sight of anyone unfamiliar. Fear hung heavy in the air, a thick, suffocating blanket. As they approached the southwest side, the clang of a hammer on anvil grew faintly audible, a rhythmic sound that, for all its familiarity, now seemed out of place amidst the town's unnatural quiet. They located a small, sturdy building with smoke curling from its chimney, the blacksmith's forge. Cale signalled for them to stop. "I'll go first. If there's trouble, hide. Wait for my signal." He approached the door, his hand resting on his sword. He knocked softly, a series of quick, deliberate taps. After a moment, a gruff voice from within called out, "Who's there?" "The forge is closed for the night." "An old traveller seeking a hot meal and a word about a mutual acquaintance," Cale replied, his voice calm and steady. There was a pause, then the sound of a heavy bolt being drawn back. The door creaked open, revealing a burly man with a soot-stained leather apron and powerful muscled arms. His face, though wary, softened slightly as his eyes adjusted to Cale's shadowed form. "Cale! What in the blazes are you doing here?" the blacksmith exclaimed, recognition dawning in his eyes. He glanced past Cale, his gaze lingering in the darkness. "And who's with you?" Kale stepped aside, revealing Elara and Ren. "These two need to speak with you, Borin. Urgently. Your niece, Ren." Borin's eyes widened, first in shock, then in dawning fear as he saw Ren. "Ren! By the Maker! What are you doing here? I heard you were taken with the other conscripts." "Uncle Borin!" Ren cried, rushing forward and embracing the burly blacksmith. Tears welled in her eyes. "We escaped. And we came to warn you. Something terrible is happening." Borin led them inside the forge, quickly barring the heavy door. The warmth of the dying coals was a welcome comfort, but the grim expressions on Elara and Kale's faces told him this was no social visit. "Tell me everything," Borin said, his voice laced with concern, his eyes meeting Elara's. "What has become of Oakhaven? And what is this darkness Kale speaks of?" Elara recounted their journey, the harshness of the forced march, the rumours of Gloomfang, the discovery of the shadow-touched guards, and their growing certainty that Lord Vargas was dabbling in something far more dangerous than simple tyranny. Kale added details about the heart of the mountain and the veil, explaining the ancient lore he had uncovered. Borin listened intently, his face growing grimmer with each word. The hum, the sickness, the strange marks on the houses. "It all makes sense now," he muttered. "I thought it was just fear, paranoia. But they're dying, Kale. The people, not just from the mines, but here, in Oakhaven. A creeping illness, a madness that makes them turn on each other. My own neighbour, old Master Eldrin, he saw a shadow man in his house just last night. Said it was calling to him." He paused, then looked at Ren, his eyes filled with a desperate sadness. "And my brother, Ren's father. He was taken to Gloomfang 2 weeks ago. He sent a message back, a scribbled note saying, 'The stone sings to me.' We haven't heard from him since." The revelation about Ren's father hit Elara hard. It added a deeply personal stake to their burgeoning quest. They weren't just fighting for abstract justice. They were fighting for family, for the very souls of the people they cared about. "We need to get out of Oakhaven, Uncle," Ren pleaded. "It's not safe here. Kale says there's a pass to the Iron Fang Peaks." Borin shook his head, his gaze firm. "Number not yet. My brother is still in those mines, and my forge, this town. I can't just abandon it, not when the shadow is here. We need more than just a warning. We need a plan, and perhaps we need to find what Vargas is truly after in Gloomfang. If we can stop him there, perhaps we can stop the blight from consuming us all." He looked at Kale, then at Elara, his eyes burning with a fierce, defiant light. "You two have brought me the truth. Now help me fight it." Elara realized that their mission had just changed. They were no longer simply messengers. They were now part of a growing resistance, entwined with the fate of Oakhaven and the looming shadow. The night wore on, filled with hushed conversations and the planning of their next desperate moves. Borin, the seasoned blacksmith, proved to be more than just brawn. His mind was sharp, his knowledge of Oakhaven's hidden passages and its inhabitants invaluable. He quickly grasped the gravity of Elara and Kale's warnings, his initial shock giving way to a steely resolve. "The town council is useless," Borin stated, his voice low and angry. "Lord Vargas has them bought and paid for. They'll never believe you, or if they do, they'll suppress the truth to maintain their comforts." He slammed a fist on his anvil, a dull thud. "But there are others, people who have suffered under Vargas's thumb, or who have lost loved ones to the mines and the strange sickness. They might listen." Kyle nodded. "We need to find the discontent, those who still possess courage and a will to fight, but carefully. One wrong word and we'll all be decorating Vargas's gallows." Their immediate goal shifted from merely warning Oakhaven to discreetly gathering potential allies within the town. Borin suggested a few names: Old Man Hemlock, a reclusive herbalist who distrusted all authority; Lysandra, a tavern keeper with a sharp tongue and a deep hatred for Vargas's soldiers; and a former town guard captain, Rorik, no relation to Elara's brother, who had been unjustly dismissed and now lived a quiet, bitter life on the outskirts. The first step was to secure a safer hiding place. Borin, with his extensive knowledge of the town's nooks and crannies, led them to a hidden cellar beneath his forge, accessible through a clever mechanism behind a loose stone. It was dusty and cramped, but offered a degree of safety they hadn't known since leaving Stonebrook. The next few days were a blur of furtive movements under the cloak of darkness. Kyle, with his unparalleled stealth, would venture out to make contact with Borin's suggested allies. Elara and Wren remained mostly hidden, helping Borin in the forge during the day, learning rudimentary smithing skills and observing the town from a distance. The acrid smell in Oakhaven seemed to intensify, and the fear in the eyes of the townspeople grew more pronounced. They saw more guards, their patrols more aggressive, their faces often pale and drawn. The chalked symbols Elara had seen earlier were now on almost every other door. "Those are warding signs," Borin explained, his voice grim, pointing to a symbol on a nearby house. "Old superstition. People think it keeps the bad things out. But if the bad things are already inside their heads..." He trailed off, shaking his head. One evening Cale returned from a contact, his face etched with worry. "Hemlock is gone, his house ransacked. They say he was taken by Vargas's guards, accused of sorcery. Lysandra is cautious, but she agreed to spread whispers among her most trusted patrons, not about us, but about the true nature of the sickness and the mines." The most promising contact was Rorik, the former guard captain. Cale described him as a man of honour, broken but not entirely shattered. He had lost his family to a mining accident a few years prior, and harboured a deep resentment towards Vargas. "He's a hard nut to crack," Cale admitted, "but he listens. He knows this town, and he knows Vargas's methods. He won't join us easily, but he might be persuaded if he sees enough proof." Their chance came on the following night. A section of the town near the old mill, not far from Borin's forge, was plagued by an unusual incident. Screams had pierced the night, followed by the sound of something large moving through the streets. By morning, a family was found dead, their bodies bearing the same strange lesions as the buried guards. And worse, there were reports of a dark, hunched figure seen fleeing the scene, moving with unnatural speed. "The shadow is here," Borin stated, his voice trembling as he relayed the news. "It's no longer just a hum in the mines, it's walking our streets." This was the proof Rorik needed. Kyle, Elara and Wren, guided by Borin, made their way stealthily to the scene, avoiding the agitated town guards. The sight was horrifying. The victims were twisted, their faces frozen in expressions of pure terror, their skin discoloured by the black lesions. As they examined the scene, Cale pointed to subtle tracks in the mud, unlike any animal. A shadow-touched creature, a guardian, as Borin described. This is what Vargas is unleashing. Their next meeting with Rorik, the former captain, was tense. They found him in his small, dilapidated house, cleaning an old, well-maintained sword. His eyes, though wary, held a spark of grim recognition as Cale laid out their evidence, showing him sketches of the shadow-touched creatures Cale had encountered on his wanderings. These are the things that killed my family," Rorik rasped, his knuckles white around his sword hilt. "Vargas covered it up, called it a rock slide, but I always knew." He looked at Elara, then at Wren, his gaze lingering on their determined faces. "You're just a farm girl and a child and an old wanderer. What hope do you have against Vargas's army, let alone these abominations?" "We have truth," Elara said, stepping forward, her voice clear despite her apprehension. "And we have a chance to fight, before this darkness consumes everything. Your brother is in Gloomfang. Borin's brother is in Gloomfang. Our families, our homes are next. We may be few, but we will not stand by and let Vargas destroy this land." Rorik stared at her, a long, piercing look. He saw not just a farm girl, but a fire, a fierce determination that reminded him of the ideals he once fought for. He sighed, a sound of profound weariness, but then slowly he nodded. "All right," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I'll help you. I can't fight an army, but I know how to organise, how to train, and I know every secret passage, every weakness in Oakhaven's defences. If this shadow is truly upon us, then we'll meet it with steel and defiance." With Rorik's reluctant but firm commitment, the small seed of rebellion began to take root in Oakhaven. They had secured a crucial ally, a man who understood the town's dynamics and the bitter realities of fighting against a powerful lord. Their immediate focus shifted to strengthening their nascent resistance within the town, gathering more information and preparing for the inevitable confrontation with the encroaching darkness. Elara felt a renewed sense of purpose, realizing that her flight from Stonebrook had led her not to mere survival, but to the cusp of a much larger struggle for the fate of her world. With Borin's forge as their base and Rorik, the ex-captain, now reluctantly on their side, the nascent resistance in Oakhaven began to take shape. Chaol focused on training Elara and Ren, teaching them not just how to fight, but how to think like warriors. Elara, with her natural strength, proved a quick study with the sword and shield Borin fashioned for her. She learned to block, parry and strike with precision, her movements gaining a dangerous fluidity. Ren, too small for heavy weapons, was trained in stealth and reconnaissance, her quick mind making her adept at observing and gathering information. Rorik, meanwhile, began to discreetly reach out to his old contacts within the town guard and among the disillusioned merchants and labourers. It was a slow and dangerous process. Fear was a powerful weapon, and Vargas's grip on Oakhaven was tight. Many were too afraid to openly defy the Lord, but they were willing to listen, to offer small bits of information, or to simply turn a blind eye to certain activities. Lysandra, the tavern keeper Borin had mentioned, proved to be a valuable asset. Her tavern, the Gilded Griffin, was a hub of gossip and rumour. She, along with a few trusted servers, subtly spread Chaol's warnings about the Shadow and Vargas's true intentions, planting seeds of doubt and defiance among the populace. She also became a crucial source of information, relaying snippets of conversation overheard from Vargas's soldiers and local officials. Through these channels they learned more disturbing details. Reports of bizarre illnesses, violent outbursts, and unsettling whispers from the northern districts of Oakhaven grew more frequent. The chalked symbols on doors became more elaborate, some almost resembling ancient forgotten runes. The acrid smell Elara had noticed now seemed to cling to the very air of the town, especially at night. One evening a young boy, pale and trembling, arrived at Borin's forge with a small, intricately folded piece of parchment. He said he had been told by a cloaked figure, who vanished into an alley as quickly as he appeared, to deliver it only to the blacksmith who still remembers the true steel. Borin, his brow furrowed, unfolded the parchment. Inside was a finely drawn map of a section of Gloomfang mines, annotated with strange symbols and a single, cryptic message, written in a language Chaol recognized as an ancient dialect of the mountain dwarves. "Seek the Whisper Stone. It sings the truth, the heart awakens, the veil thins, beware the blind cult." Chaol's eyes widened as he read the message. The Whisper Stone. This is what Vargas seeks. It is a conduit, a focal point for the raw energies within the heart of the mountain, and blind cult. These must be the forces truly manipulating Vargas, the ones behind the shadow. The map also indicated a hidden entrance to a lower, older section of the mines, one that seemed to bypass the main, heavily guarded tunnels. It was a dangerous proposition, but it offered a chance to get closer to the heart of the mountain and the Whisper Stone without having to fight through Vargas's entire army. "This is from my brother," Ren whispered, her voice trembling as she recognized a small, distinct flourish in the corner of the map. A signature only her father used. "He's alive." He must have drawn this. He must be trying to help us. A wave of hope, mixed with renewed urgency, swept over the group. Ren's father was alive, and he was actively working against Vargas from within the mines. "This changes everything," Elara said, looking at Chaol and Borin. "We can't just wait for the shadow to come to us. We have to go to Gloomfang. We have to find Ren's father, find this Whisper Stone, and stop Vargas." Chaol, usually cautious, nodded slowly. "Indeed, this map, if authentic, is a gift. But it also means Ren's father is in grave danger. The blind cult will be aware of anyone who tries to expose their secrets." Their plan solidified. While Rorik continued to build the resistance within Oakhaven, Chaol, Elara, and Ren, along with Borin, whose knowledge of mining and the earth would be invaluable, would prepare for a stealthy infiltration of Gloomfang mines. They would use the hidden entrance Ren's father had indicated, aiming to find him, secure the Whisper Stone, and disrupt Vargas's dark rituals. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but with a new sense of purpose and the desperate hope of rescuing Ren's father, Elara felt ready to face the deepest shadows. With the cryptic map and Ren's father's desperate message in hand, the group's focus shifted entirely towards infiltrating Gloomfang. Borin worked tirelessly in his forge, not on mundane repairs, but crafting specialized tools for their perilous journey. He forged lightweight climbing hooks, silent hinged lockpicks, and even a set of small, sharp throwing knives for Ren, teaching her how to wield them with surprising accuracy. He also reinforced Elara's new sword and shield, ensuring they would stand up to whatever dangers lay ahead. Kale, meanwhile, intensified Elara's and Wren's training. Their sessions in the hidden cellar beneath the forge became more rigorous, focusing on silent movement in total darkness, close-quarters combat in confined spaces, and recognizing the telltale signs of shadow-touch creatures. Elara discovered an innate sensitivity to her surroundings, a subtle hum in the air when danger was near, a faint echo of the heart of the mountain that Kale believed resonated with her. She learned to trust this intuition, honing it into a powerful tool for navigation and warning. Wren, though initially hesitant, showed a remarkable aptitude for stealth. Her small stature and natural agility made her an ideal scout. Kale taught her how to blend into shadows, how to listen for faint sounds, and how to interpret complex patterns of movement. She also delved into old mining charts Borin possessed, studying the labyrinthine layout of Gloomfang, memorizing key junctions and potential escape routes. Rorik continued his work above ground, steadily building their network of allies. He identified other blacksmiths, wary merchants, and even a few disaffected town guards who were secretly appalled by Vargas's escalating cruelty and the strange events plaguing Oakhaven. These contacts would serve as their eyes and ears, and if necessary their diversion when the time came for the main assault on Gloomfang. Despite the intense preparation, moments of fear still crept in. Elara would often wake in the dead of night, the acrid smell of Oakhaven seeping even into their hidden cellar, her mind racing with images of the shadow-touched guards and the thought of her own family in Stonebrook, unaware of the encroaching darkness. She worried for Tom and Lyra, for Rorik and Finn. Her promise to return echoed in her heart, a constant motivation, but also a heavy burden. Wren, too, had her moments of profound sadness, especially when she spoke of her father. He always said the mountains sang to him, she confided in Elara one evening, her voice soft. He loved the mines, loved the challenge of finding the veins, but never like this, never with this darkness. Elara held her, offering what little comfort she could, understanding the deep-seated fear of losing a loved one to something so unnatural. Kale, observing their struggles, offered words of grim wisdom. Fear is a weapon, child. It can paralyze you, or it can sharpen your senses. Learn to use it. Let it fuel your resolve, not consume it. He spoke of the ancient Grey Wardens, of their unwavering commitment to fighting the Blight, no matter the cost. He emphasized that their fight was not just for Oakhaven, or for Stonebrook, but for the very balance of the land. As the days turned into weeks, their preparations neared completion. Borin finished crafting a special, reinforced pickaxe for himself, its head gleaming with a subtle enchantment he claimed would help cut through corrupted stone. They packed provisions, dried meat, hardtack, and a small amount of potent herbal drafts prepared by a reluctant Hemlock, who had miraculously reappeared after being taken, changed and more wary but still willing to help the resistance in secret, to counter the mine's debilitating effects. The night they were set to depart, a final clandestine meeting was held in Borin's cellar. Rorik presented his intelligence. Grimgar and a significant portion of Vargas's elite guard had been dispatched to a distant border skirmish, leaving Oakhaven with a reduced garrison. This was their window of opportunity. However, he also warned of increased activity around the main entrance to Gloomfang. More guards, and rumours of strange cloaked figures moving in and out, figures that matched Kale's description of the blind cult. The path is open, but the prize is guarded by more than just soldiers, Rorik said, his hand resting on the hilt of his own sword. May the Maker guide your steps, my friends, and may you bring light back to this shadowed land. As they emerged from Borin's forge into the quiet starlit streets of Oakhaven, Elara felt a strange mixture of terror and fierce determination. The acrid smell was still there, but now a subtle hum seemed to vibrate beneath her feet, a faint, unsettling tremor that she knew was not the town but the mountain, calling to them. Gloomfang awaited, a labyrinth of darkness, secrets, and the promise of a battle that would decide the fate of many. The approach to Gloomfang Mines was as desolate and foreboding as Kale had described. The Ironfang Peaks, a jagged range of mountains with perpetually snow-capped summits, loomed in the distance, their shadowed forms like sleeping giants. The land around the mines was scarred, deforested to feed Vargas's insatiable war machine and provide timbers for his tunnels. The air, already cold, held a distinct metallic tang mixed with that cloying, acrid sweetness Elara had come to associate with the shadow. Kale led them towards the hidden entrance Wren's father had marked on the map. It wasn't a grand gate or obvious shaft, but a cleverly concealed opening in a sheer rock face, almost completely overgrown with thorny vines and dark clinging moss. It was clear that only someone intimately familiar with the mines, or those who truly wished to remain hidden, would know of its existence. "This is an old prospector's tunnel," Borin explained, his voice low as he examined the rock face, used by the first to seek out the lesser veins. "It's unstable, and likely unmaintained for decades, but it avoids the main gates and the blind cult's sentries." After Kale carefully cleared away the overgrowth, he revealed a small wooden door, reinforced with rusted iron bands. The lock was ancient, but Kale, with a set of Borin's custom-made lockpicks, quickly dispatched it. A gust of cold, stale air, thick with the smell of damp rock and something else, something subtly foul, wafted out from the opening. "Once we enter, there's no turning back easily," Kale warned, his eyes scanning their faces. "The shadow deepens with every step. Stay together, trust your senses, and remember your training." Elara gripped her sword, its weight a familiar comfort. Wren clutched her throwing knives, her small face determined. Borin, with his pickaxe slung over his shoulder, nodded grimly. With a shared glance, they stepped through the threshold into the gaping maw of Gloomfang. The darkness inside was absolute, far deeper than any night Elara had known in the outside world. Kale immediately produced a small, hooded lantern, its dim light barely pushing back the oppressive gloom. The tunnel was narrow, uneven, and slanted downwards. The air grew heavier, colder, and the faint, unsettling hum Borin had spoken of began to vibrate, a low thrum that Elara felt more in her bones than heard with her ears. "The stone sings," Borin murmured, his eyes wide, "just like my brother said." They moved cautiously, Kale in the lead, his sword drawn. Elara followed closely, her shield ready, her heightened senses alert for any anomaly. Wren brought up the rear, her eyes darting into every shadow. The walls of the tunnel were rough, sometimes dripping with icy water. Strange crystalline formations jutted out from the rock, glimmering faintly in the lantern light, but their beauty was unsettling, their shapes unnatural. After a long descent, the tunnel opened into a vast cavern. The scale was breathtaking, terrifying. Gigantic stalactites and stalagmites pierced the darkness, creating grotesque, shadowy sculptures. And everywhere, embedded in the rock, were veins of a dark, crystalline substance, almost black, that pulsed with a faint, malevolent light, echoing the hum in Elara's bones. "Raw shadow," Kale whispered, his voice tight. "The blight. This is what Vargas is extracting. He's poisoning the mountain itself." As they crossed the cavern, their footsteps echoing unnervingly, they began to see signs of recent activity. Crude mining tools lay scattered. Pickaxes and shovels, many of them warped and corroded as if by some unnatural acid. And then they found the first body. It was a miner, or what was left of one. His body was contorted, his face a mask of agony, and his skin was covered in the same black lesions Elara had seen on the Oakhaven guards. His eyes were wide open, staring blankly into the darkness, filled with a primal, unreasoning terror. "He didn't die from a cave-in," Borin whispered, his voice thick with horror. Something did this to him." Kyle knelt, examining the body. "Not a weapon. The blight itself. It consumes from within. This is why Vargas wants so many labourers. They are disposable." Further in they heard faint sounds, the distant clanging of picks, the rumble of rock, and then a low, rhythmic chanting. It was a disturbing guttural sound that seemed to twist the very air, resonating with the hum in Elara's bones, making her teeth ache. "The blind cult," Kyle growled. "They're here. They're performing their rituals." They pressed on, following the sounds. The tunnels became more deliberately constructed, carved by dwarven hands, but now defiled. Elara noticed more of the unsettling chalked symbols, some glowing faintly with an inner dark light. The air grew heavy, almost suffocating, and the acrid smell was now overwhelming. They eventually reached a large circular chamber. clearly an ancient dwarven temple or sacred space, now desecrated. In the centre, a massive jagged crystal, obsidian black and pulsating with dark energy, dominated the chamber. It was the Whisper Stone. Around it, cloaked figures moved, chanting in that guttural language. Their faces were hidden by deep hoods, but Elara could feel their malevolent presence, a cold, hungry energy that made her blood run cold. They were performing a ritual, channeling the dark energy from the Whisper Stone and feeding it into something else, a series of smaller crystals embedded in the chamber walls, each pulsing with the same sinister light. And then Elara saw him. Near the Whisper Stone, bound and forced to work a primitive device that seemed to be drawing energy from the crystal, was a gaunt figure. He was covered in soot, his clothes tattered, but his build was unmistakable. "Father!" Ren gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. It was Ren's father. But something was wrong. His eyes were wide and vacant, his movements sluggish, almost robotic. He was humming softly, a tuneless, unsettling melody that mirrored the hum of the Whisper Stone. He was alive, but he was not himself. He was touched by the shadow, consumed by the blight. Kale quickly pulled them back into the shadows of a nearby passage. "We can't engage them directly. They outnumber us, and the cultists are not easily defeated. We need a plan. We need to disrupt the ritual, free Ren's father, and destroy that Whisper Stone." He looked at Elara, his eyes narrowed. "This is where your resolve will truly be tested, Elara. This is the heart of the shadow." The sight of Ren's father, alive but enthralled by the Whisper Stone's dark influence, fueled Elara with a cold determination. She glanced at Ren, whose face was a mixture of hope and profound sorrow, and then at Borin, his knuckles white as he gripped his pickaxe, his eyes burning with a desperate desire for vengeance against the forces that had taken his brother. Kyle, ever the pragmatist, kept them hidden, his gaze sweeping over the circular chamber. The hooded figures, the blind cultists, moved with an unnatural grace, their guttural chanting intensifying as they poured their malevolent energy into the obsidian Whisper Stone. Smaller crystals embedded in the chamber walls pulsed in response, creating a web of dark power that seemed to hum through the very rock. "The cultists are feeding the Whisper Stone," Kale whispered, his voice grim. "It's a conduit, drawing the blight's energy from the heart of the mountain and channeling it, perhaps to awaken something even deeper, or to spread the corruption further." He pointed to a faint, almost invisible outline on the floor, etched around the Whisper Stone. "That's an ancient dwarven warding circle, meant to contain the heart's power. They've twisted it, inverted its purpose." Their plan had to be swift and decisive. They couldn't hope to defeat all the cultists in open combat, especially with Ren's father caught in the midst of it. "We need to disrupt their ritual," Elara stated, her voice firm, "and then destroy the Whisper Stone. That might break their hold on Ren's father." "Destroying it won't be easy," Borin added. "That stone is ancient, and it's feeding directly from the mountain's core. My pickaxe, it has some enchantment, but against that much raw shadow." Kale looked at Elara, a flicker of an idea in his eyes. "You mentioned a hum, Elara, a sensitivity to the mountain's energy. When you touched the tablet in the ruins, did you feel anything?" Elara nodded, remembering the strange resonance. "Yes, like an echo, a very faint one." "The heart of the mountain, before it was corrupted, was a source of pure energy," Kale explained. "If you can channel that same pure energy, however faintly, it might disrupt the Whisper Stone's dark flow. It's a gamble, but it's our best chance." The plan began to form. Ren, with her stealth and agility, would create a diversion, drawing a few cultists away. Kale would use the distraction to engage the remaining cultists, keeping them occupied. Borin would attempt to reach Ren's father and try to break him free from his bonds, and Elara, positioned strategically, would attempt to focus her newfound sensitivity to somehow channel the mountain's inherent, uncorrupted energy against the Whisper Stone. Ren, despite her fear, nodded. "I can do it. I can throw these knives, make enough noise to draw attention." Borin gripped Ren's shoulder. "Be careful, niece. We'll get your father back." As Kale gave the signal, Ren moved with surprising speed. She hurled one of her throwing knives, not at a cultist, but at a fragile stalactite hanging from the cavern ceiling. The small blade struck true, and the stalactite cracked, sending a shower of pebbles and dust down into the chamber with a loud clatter. The cultists' chanting faltered. 2 of them immediately turned, their hooded heads snapping towards the sound, and began to move towards Ren's position. This was Cale's cue. With a roar, he burst from the shadows, his curved sword a silver blur in the dim light. He moved with practiced ease, parrying and striking, engaging 2 cultists simultaneously, his movements fluid and deadly. Borin, seizing the opportunity, rushed towards Ren's father. The device he was chained to was intricate, pulsing with dark light. "Brother, it's me, Borin! Fight it!" he shouted, beginning to hack at the chains with his enchanted pickaxe. Meanwhile, Elara, positioned behind a cluster of dark crystals, focused all her will. She reached out with her mind, trying to feel that subtle hum, that faint echo of pure energy Cale had spoken of. The dark energy from the Whisperstone fought against her, a cold, cloying presence that tried to invade her thoughts, to fill her with fear and despair. She felt the pressure in her bones, the throbbing pain in her teeth, but she pushed through it. She thought of Stonebrook, of her family, of the verdant fields and the clear stream, of everything that was pure and good. She remembered the warmth of the sun on her skin, the strength of the earth beneath her feet. Slowly, hesitantly, a different hum began to rise within her, a faint, pure resonance that was the antithesis of the shadow. She focused it, imagining it as a beacon of light against the encroaching darkness, directing it towards the Whisperstone. A high-pitched whine began to emanate from the crystal. The pulsating dark light intensified, then flickered erratically. The cultists, distracted by Cale's fierce fighting and the strange phenomenon, began to stumble, their chants breaking apart. "It's working, Elara! Keep pushing!" Cale yelled, narrowly deflecting a cultist's dark blade. At the Whisperstone, Ren's father let out a guttural cry, his vacant eyes momentarily clearing, a flicker of sanity returning. Borin, still hacking at the chains, yelled encouragement. The hum from Elara intensified, and with a final desperate surge of will she unleashed the pure energy she had channeled. It wasn't a physical blast, but a wave of pure resonance that slammed into the Whisperstone. The massive crystal shrieked, a sound that ripped through the cavern, echoing the agony of the mountain itself. The dark light emanating from it flared violently, then began to crack. Spindly fissures spread across its obsidian surface, like spiderwebs shattering glass. The blind cultists screamed, a mix of rage and terror. Their power faltered, their dark magic momentarily broken. One by one, the smaller crystals embedded in the walls exploded with dull pops, showering the chamber with corrupted dust. As the Whisperstone groaned and fractured, Borin delivered a final powerful blow with his pickaxe. With a thunderous crack, the massive crystals split apart, collapsing into a pile of smoking black shards. The moment the Whisperstone shattered, a profound silence descended upon the chamber, replacing the cacophony of chanting and humming. The acrid smell diminished, replaced by a fresh, clean scent of damp earth. The lingering darkness receded, and a faint natural light, filtering from unknown cracks in the cavern ceiling, illuminated the chamber. Ren's father, now free from his chains, collapsed to the ground, gasping, his eyes slowly gaining clarity. Borin rushed to him, holding him close. The remaining cultists, their ritual broken, stood stunned for a moment, then turned their malevolent gaze towards Elara and her companions. Their faces, now visible in the faint light, were pale and gaunt, their eyes not blind, but covered with intricate dark tattoos that seemed to writhe with their anger. They were no longer chanting, but hissing, their bodies contorting. "They'll try to stop us," Kyle said, wiping blood from his sword. "The ritual is broken, but they still serve their master." He looked at Elara, a fierce pride in his eyes. "You did well, child. Better than I could have hoped, but the fight is not over." Elara, exhausted but exhilarated, felt the hum in her bones slowly subside. She had tapped into something ancient, something profound. The Whisperstone was destroyed, but the blind cult remained, and the true source of the shadow, the heart of the mountain, was still somewhere deeper within Gloomfang. They had won a battle, but the war for the land had only just begun. The cultists, enraged by the destruction of the Whisperstone, surged forward. Their previous ritualistic grace was replaced by a feral, uncoordinated savagery. They clawed and bit, no longer wielding weapons but relying on their corrupted strength. Cale met them head-on, his sword a whirlwind of steel, expertly deflecting their attacks and striking with deadly precision. Elara, emboldened by her success with the Whisper Stone, moved to cover Borin and Ren, her shield deflecting a cultist's lunge, her sword finding a gap in another's defence. Ren, newly invigorated by seeing her father free, peppered the cultists with her throwing knives, her aim surprisingly accurate. Borin meanwhile cradled his brother Theron, who was slowly regaining his senses. Theron coughed violently, the unnatural hum fading from his eyes, replaced by a bewildered pain. "Borin! Ren! What happened?" "We broke their hold, brother," Borin said, tears in his eyes. "But we're not out of this yet." He looked at the fight, then at his still weakened brother. "Can you move, Theron?" Theron slowly nodded, pushing himself up with Borin's help. The cultists. The shadow. It wants the heart of the mountain. It's deeper. A chamber, where the veil is thin. His voice was weak but urgent. Kyle, seeing Theron's return to lucidity, pressed his attack, creating an opening. "We need to go. Deeper, if the heart is there. Elara, follow me. Ren, Borin, protect Theron and stick close." They fought their way out of the circular chamber, the cultists snarling and hissing behind them. The tunnels twisted and turned, and Kale, guided by Theron's fragmented memories and his own instincts, led them ever deeper into the mountain's core. The air grew thicker, heavier, and the oppressive hum returned, stronger than before, resonating with a terrifying power. Elara could feel it now, not just in her bones, but in her very soul, a raw primal energy that was both captivating and terrifying. They eventually arrived at another, even larger cavern, its ceiling lost in perpetual darkness. Here, the hum was deafening, vibrating through the very stone, making it difficult to think. In the centre of this colossal chamber was not a crystal, but a swirling vortex of pure darkness, radiating an intense cold that seeped into their bones. This was the heart of the mountain, corrupted and actively bleeding shadow into the world, and standing before it, his back to them, was Lord Vargas. He was no longer clad in his usual lordly attire, but in dark, ornate robes, adorned with the same intricate, writhing tattoos as the blind cultists. Beside him stood a figure even more terrifying, tall, gaunt, with eyes that glowed with an unnatural cold light. This was the true master of the blind cult, the entity pulling Vargas's strings. Elara felt a chill of recognition from Kale. This was the great blight that the ancient texts spoke of, or at least its herald. "Lord Vargas!" Kale roared, drawing his attention. Vargas turned, his face no longer merely cruel, but twisted into a mask of triumphant, insane power. His eyes, usually cold, now burned with a dark, unnatural fire. "Kale, you meddling fool! You thought to stop me? You're too late! The heart is mine. The veil is almost broken. Soon, this entire world will bow to the shadow." He gestured dramatically towards the swirling vortex of darkness. The entity beside Vargas let out a low, chilling hiss. It raised a skeletal hand, and from the swirling darkness of the heart, two grotesque creatures emerged, amorphous, shadow-wrought beasts with razor-sharp claws and glowing red eyes. The guardians Borin had spoken of now revealed in their horrific glory. "Kill them," the entity commanded, its voice a dry, rasping whisper that seemed to echo directly in Elara's mind, a voice full of ancient malevolence. "Do not let them interfere. The ritual must be completed." The guardians lunged forward, their movements swift and silent. Kyle, Elara, Borin and Ren braced themselves, their small band of light against the overwhelming darkness. Ren's father, Theron, though still weak, grabbed a discarded pickaxe, a flicker of his old miner's defiance in his eyes. "We won't let you," Elara shouted, her voice echoing in the vast cavern, a small but defiant challenge against the encroaching blight. The hum in her bones intensified, not with fear, but with a fierce, burning resolve. She felt the pure energy of the mountain stir within her once more, ready to be unleashed against the greatest darkness she had ever known. The fight for Gloomfang and for the entire land had truly begun. The guardians were swift and merciless, their shadowy forms difficult to track in the dim, fluctuating light of the cavern. Kyle engaged one directly, his curved sword clashing against its razor claws with a shower of sparks that briefly illuminated its grotesque features. A swirling mass of shadow and jagged stone. Elara, Her shield raised faced the other, its glowing red eyes fixed on her. She parried its brutal lunge, the impact jarring her arm, and countered with a swing of her sword, but the blade merely passed through its ethereal form, leaving no mark. "They're not solid," she yelled, frustration and a fresh surge of fear mixing within her. "Focus your energy, Elara," Kale shouted, struggling with his own opponent. "They feed on the blight. You must disrupt their connection." Elara closed her eyes for a fleeting moment, pushing past her fear. She felt the mountain's pure hum within her, a counterpoint to the sickening thrum of the corrupted heart. She opened her eyes, focusing her will. As the Guardian lunged again, she didn't parry with her shield, but thrust her sword forward, not to strike, but to project the energy she had channeled. A faint, golden light, almost imperceptible against the dark creature, pulsed from her blade. The Guardian shrieked, a sound of agony, its shadowy form wavering, almost dissolving. It recoiled, snarling, its red eyes flickering as if in pain. It was wounded, not physically, but spiritually. "That's it," Kale yelled, a surge of renewed hope in his voice. He shifted his tactics, focusing on disrupting his own opponent with a surge of the warding energy he often used against shadow-touch creatures. Meanwhile, Borin and Theron, despite Theron's lingering weakness, provided crucial support. Borin, with his enchanted pickaxe, managed to strike the swirling darkness of the heart itself, causing a ripple of dark energy that made Vargas flinch. Theron, his miner's eyes still sharp, spotted weak points in the cavern, spots where the corrupted stone seemed thinner, more fragile. Ren, with her agile movements, darted around the Guardians, her throwing knives aimed not at their forms, but at the smaller crystals embedded in the cavern walls that were feeding the heart. Each time a crystal shattered, the overall hum of darkness lessened slightly, and the Guardians seemed to falter, their attacks less coordinated. The air crackled with malevolent energy as the entity intensified its efforts, feeding more of the shadow into Vargas. The Lord, now a grotesque parody of his former self, his features distorted by the dark power, let out a guttural roar and lunged towards Elara, a black blade manifesting in his hand, crackling with dark lightning. "You will not interfere, peasant!" Vargas shrieked, his voice echoing with the entity's rasp. Kale intercepted him, his own sword meeting Vargas's with a shower of sparks and a jarring impact. The Grey Warden fought with a grim determination, but Vargas's shadow-enhanced strength was immense, pushing Kale back. "Go, Elara!" "The Veil!" Kyle grunted, struggling against Vargas. Elara knew what she had to do. She ignored the other Guardian, which was now engaging Borin and Theron, its attacks less potent but still dangerous. Ren, with surprising courage, threw herself into the fray, her knives distracting the creature, buying precious seconds. Elara focused all her will, all her newfound connection to the mountain's pure energy. She raised her shield, not as a defense, but as a focal point. The hum in her bones intensified, a burning light within her. She channeled it, pouring it into her shield, which began to glow with a brilliant golden aura, pushing back the oppressive darkness of the cavern. "Now!" Kyle roared, seeing her ready. With a primal scream, Elara lunged towards the thinning veil. The entity, sensing her intent, let out a piercing shriek and unleashed a torrent of pure shadow directly at her. The darkness slammed into her, a crushing weight that threatened to extinguish her light, to consume her utterly. But Elara held firm, fueled by the images of her family, of Stonebrook, of all the innocent lives Vargas threatened. The golden light from her shield flared, pushing back the shadow, creating a path through the encroaching gloom. She reached the veil, the rock wall now almost translucent, revealing the churning, chaotic void beyond. It pulsed with a horrifying allure, a promise of ultimate destruction. Elara slammed her glowing shield against it, pouring every ounce of her channeled energy into the ancient barrier. A blinding flash of golden light erupted from the veil, a pure, resonant wave that ripped through the cavern. The entity shrieked, a sound of unimaginable pain and fury, recoiling from the sudden burst of light. Vargas, caught in the wave, screamed as the shadow infusion within him violently destabilized, his body writhing, the dark tattoos on his robes burning away. The veil, reinforced by Elara's channeled energy, pulsed with renewed strength. The thinning section began to mend, the glimpses of the void beyond fading as the ancient barrier solidified. The swirling vortex of the heart of the mountain, deprived of the entity's direct influence and Elara's counter-energy, began to shrink, its dark tendrils retracting. The Guardians, no longer fed by the full power of the blight, dissolved into wisps of shadow, their glowing red eyes winking out. Vargas, now stripped of the shadow's power, collapsed to the ground, his body a withered husk, his eyes wide and empty, the madness finally consuming him. He was no longer a threat, merely a broken man. The entity, its form wavering, let out one last, chilling shriek of pure hatred, its glowing eyes fixed on Elara. You have merely delayed the inevitable, peasant. The blight will return, it will consume all. With that final malevolent promise, its gaunt form dissolved into a wisp of shadow, retreating back into the depths of the mountain, or perhaps into the void beyond the veil. Silence descended upon the cavern once more, a profound, almost sacred silence, broken only by the ragged breathing of Elara and her companions. The air was still cold, but the acrid smell was gone, replaced by the clean scent of damp rock. The oppressive hum in Elara's bones had vanished, leaving her utterly exhausted, but also filled with a sense of profound peace. Kael, leaning heavily on his sword, his face streaked with soot and blood, gave a weary smile. "You did it, child. You saved us all." Borin and Theron rushed to Elara, their faces filled with awe and gratitude. Ren embraced her, tears of relief streaming down her face. "You were amazing, Elara." Elara felt a wave of dizziness, her strength completely spent, but a warmth spread through her heart. She had faced the deepest darkness, and she had not broken. She had found a power within herself, a connection to the very essence of the world, and she had used it to protect what she loved. The heart of the mountain was still there, but its corruption had been pushed back, the veil reinforced. They had won the battle in Gloomfang, but the entity's parting words echoed in Elara's mind. The blight will return. She knew this was not the end of her journey, but merely the beginning of a larger war, a war she was now irrevocably a part of. The immediate aftermath was a blur of exhaustion and relief. They helped Theron, still weak but lucid, out of the cavern. As they made their way back through the, now silent, less oppressive tunnels, Borin and Theron shared a quiet, emotional reunion. Theron recounted the horrors of the blind cult, the insidious whispers of the Whisperstone, and how Vargas had fallen deeper and deeper into the entity's thrall, believing he would gain ultimate power. Emerging from the hidden entrance into the crisp mountain air, the starlight felt like a blessing. The scarred land around Gloomfang still bore the marks of Vargas's greed, but now a faint, almost imperceptible healing seemed to begin, a subtle shift in the very essence of the earth. Their return to Oakhaven was cautious. Rorik, having kept the resistance network active, met them at the outskirts. He quickly spread the news of Vargas's defeat and the destruction of the Whisperstone. The town, though still wary, erupted in a cautious celebration. The acrid smell was gone, and the strange symbols on the doors seemed to fade, their power broken. Lord Vargas, a broken shell of a man, was found in the heart of the mountain chamber. He was taken into custody by Rorik's newly reformed town guard, his reign of terror over. The blind cultists, their master banished and their power broken, either fled deeper into the mountains or were captured, their dark tattoos now merely faded marks on their gaunt faces. Elara, Ren, Kael, Borin and Theron were hailed as heroes, but Elara knew the truth. The blight was not truly defeated, only driven back. The entity's promise lingered. Her journey had transformed her from a simple farm girl into something more, a protector, a nascent guardian of the Vale. She still yearned for Stonebrook, for the quiet life she had left behind. But she knew that life was no longer truly an option. The world had changed, and so had she. Her path was now intertwined with the fate of the land, a path of vigilance against the returning shadow. As the days turned into weeks, Oakhaven slowly began to heal. Rorik, with Borin's and Theron's help, worked to restore order and establish a new, fairer council. The mines of Gloomfang were sealed, their corrupted depths left undisturbed, at least for now. Elara, after a heartfelt farewell to Ren, Borin and Theron, decided it was time to return to Stonebrook. Kael, ever the lone wolf, chose to accompany her, sensing that her journey was far from over. "The blight will return, Elara," Kale said as they walked the familiar path back towards her village, the Heron Peak now visible in the distance. "It always does. But now, there is someone who knows how to fight it." Elara looked at the horizon, a new light in her eyes. She was no longer just Elara the farm girl. She was Elara who had faced the shadow and lived, and she was ready for whatever came next. Her journey home was also a journey towards her new destiny, a destiny she would embrace with courage and an unwavering heart. The world was vast, full of both light and shadow, and she was now a part of its unfolding story.